So this is equality equals opportunity. And this is an area that I'm very passionate about. So ideas come from all over, but most of us exist in a relative bubble. How do we acknowledge the structural inequalities that mean that growth and opportunities aren't open to all? And how can we address them to make our workplaces more diverse, empathetic, and intelligent? I like that. Diverse, empathetic, and intelligent. Because intelligence and not everyone's that intelligent, are they? No. No, but it's true, we've got to be honest. It's true. What is it? Common sense isn't that common, you know? I'm empathetic. Some people do lack empathy. We're not talking, yeah. I'm just babbling. So our panellists are Charlie Cohen from And Sisters. We have Lauren Rosegreen. Is Rosegreen? Rosegreen. Rose. What am I saying Rosegreen for? And it's spelled the way it says. Rosegreen from MAC, and Ruth Hannan from People's Powerhouse. Can we have a round of applause, please? I'm going to start with you, Charlie. And Sisters, can you tell us all about And Sisters? And where did the name come from?
I assume this is on, there we go. So And Sisters, so we're a menstrual health brand, which is, I suppose, kind of strange considering I'm a guy talking about it, which we can touch on a little bit later, as there I'm incredibly passionate about. But we've been going since about 2019. We're now the UK's largest sustainable menstrual health care brand. We originally started within period care, so essentially the bleed stage of the menstrual cycle, but we have actually branched out across quite a few number of life stages. So when you think about life stages, we're talking about the menarche, the first period, all the way through to menopause and post-menopause, which is a life stage which is quite commonly forgotten. I mean, as I said, the business, we essentially sell period care products. They're available in most national retailers, as well as obviously a whole host of independents, and really was a grassroots business. Started by originally my wife, actually, and her mother. So that's Lucy and Claire, not sisters. They're a mother-daughter duo. And got a bit of a laugh because I said they actually look very, very similar, so they do get commonly confused as sisters. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's kind of a strange one for me to be talking about gender equality coming from, I suppose, the other side of the divide. But hopefully I can do some good convincing today as to why it's so important.
Fantastic. I'm Ruth, the People's Powerhouse.
Yeah, I always feel a bit under pressure after having that organisational title. So we're a community interest company that works across the north of England. I've only been with the organisation for 3 months. I'm the new director, and our purpose really, we were set up by a group of women basically when the Northern Powerhouse was set up and they had their first event, and all of the people who were advertised speakers were white men in suits. So they just sort of said, where you don't represent the North, where's the rest of us? And the People's Powerhouse was born. And really our purpose is to work across the North to enable residents, ordinary people in the North, to have a say in the decisions that affect their lives. So it's very much about creating equity in terms of the power structures that exist across the North, and how do we enable people from all backgrounds to have a say in those decisions, whether they be at the hyperlocal level on their street, or in their village, their town, their city, or across the region more broadly.
And Lauren from, it is MAC, isn't it?
Yeah. So MAC are a charity based in Manchester, and we support the non-profit sector in Manchester with lots of different things, but I'm the policy and influence manager. So effectively what I do is work with Manchester City Council whenever they're coming up with new policy, and then help to connect with the non-profit sector to make sure that their voices are heard. So it's all kind of about empowering people who are working in the non-profit sector to have that voice and to have that say when policy decisions are being made, because they're the people who know best around their specific thematic areas. So it's just trying to include the non-profit sector in the story and to give them a seat at the table.
Now, one of the big conversations that's been happening around EDI is not saying equality, it's more equity. And how important is that to really separate the two?
I think, yeah, it's a really difficult question. And for me personally, I think it shouldn't have to come down to terminology. I think it's all about kind of embedding the belief of it. So if somebody says equality, rather than getting on their back about saying equality, actually thinking about what is it that you want to achieve. And when it comes from a non-profit sector, we're all about amplifying voices of people with lived experience, and that's kind of the term we use. But it's basically just putting people in positions of power, giving people, not giving them a voice, but giving them a platform for their voices to be heard. Like, we're all born with a voice. So rather than thinking about definitions, I think that's my perspective on it.
Ruth, you mentioned it about the kind of like the northern aspect and perspective, and coming from Liverpool, that's something that in Manchester, we're always arguing about. Sometimes decisions are made from a southern head rather than actually the north is completely different. How do you try and push that, the northern voice and, northern issues?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we try to be really careful to say it's not about the south getting things that the north doesn't get, because I think there's a lack of equity in terms of power and voice across the whole of the country. I think for me, it's to try and get an understanding that the experiences of the north, that when things, we've had decisions made by people who don't understand a place, and really what it's about is engaging with people in that place, whether it be Liverpool or whether it be Carlisle or Newcastle, or I always use as a bit of a comedy trope my hometown of Selby, is understanding what that place needs, what those people need and want, and what they think the solutions are for their place. And I think we've become very disconnected from decisions. The Westminster, we talk about the Westminster bubble, but what we're really talking about is a government structure that we have very little say in. And for me, and part of our work is, with a big push of devolution, this idea of bringing decisions to the regions, what we have to be really careful is that we just don't replicate that model, that we don't just have a version of Westminster in the Liverpool City region or in the Greater Manchester region or in North Tyneside. Is how does that devolution present an opportunity for the people of Liverpool to start to have a say in those decisions, rather than people who already hold power going, we know what's best for you. So that I think for me is the big important thing. Yeah.
Charlie, I want to come to you in terms of, the Ancestors business. A lot, we always talk about allyship, and what does that mean? Now, I had a bit of an unconscious bias when I met you, because I thought Lauren at first was Charlie, because when I read, I was like, oh, menstrual, brand. So I was like, Charlie, female name Charlie, and then when he said, no, I'm Charlie, I was like, oh. So do you find you get that quite a bit, or yeah?
Yeah, I suppose, of course, that's a question I get all the time. And most people don't obviously know the background of Ancestors and where it originated from. I just have a very strong belief that essentially, solving the challenge of gender equity or equality is very, very challenging, and requires sort of all genders to contribute to that conversation and that challenge. Because if you only have one gender that's pushing for it, it's very unlikely to happen. I can spend a lot of time after this session talking about my background and the different problems I've tried to solve in my life. I would say solving the gender equity battle is probably the most challenging, and as I said, definitely requires all genders to be involved in the conversation. And for me, as I said, I definitely get a lot of people that assume that I can't be running a menstrual health brand. But as I said, you just have to spend a little bit of time with me to understand the passion that I have for the products and the area and the space in which we operate in.
And I think it kind of goes back to that decision of having to prove yourself, why you deserve to be in that position. And it does go back to that question of, being belonging in a space and where you fit in that space. And I think a lot of people would have experienced that in some kind of degree of going into a space and thinking, is this really meant to be for me? But then knowing that you belong there because of your passion for the industry, your passion for gender equality and healthcare, and then having to, you know, really push and say, well, I've done this, I've done that, like regurgitating your whole CV to a room for them to understand, like, you deserve to be in this space talking about gender equity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've spoken in a lot of rooms, and one of them, you know, is around investments. Obviously, Ancestors has raised quite a lot of investment over its time, and probably will continue to do so. And obviously, investment circles tend to be filled with white men, and it's actually a very interesting experience to have. You know, I've been in scenarios where you start talking and you can see almost the whole room shut off. But once you answer the question, which I always do, essentially who in the room is affected by implications or impact within menstrual health, and usually you end up with the room basically no one puts their hand up. But then if you say, look, who has any woman in their life or anyone who menstruates, and the whole room puts their hand up. And then after that conversation, you tend to have the whole room engaged. As I said, like a big part of my responsibility in the place that I sit is really just to take actions and prove that essentially I should be in the place that I'm in and that I can contribute in the way I believe I can, and that it's not just passion and as I said, strategic thought that doesn't end up in execution that has real impact.
I want people to start thinking about questions as well, because yeah, we were quite, Andrew, make sure you flag me up because we will talk all day, because I think this is a really important topic. Lauren, you know, one of the things that I read was you know, we talk about social issues and a safe home. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think when we were thinking about so my background is working in homelessness and working with refugees and asylum seekers, which seems a little bit far removed from this kind of conference, but it does all really tie in because, well, in so many different ways, the way that businesses have moved since COVID, remote working being one example, we've seen inequalities, kind of the divide has become bigger and the gap between people has become even worse. And I think things like people think that remote working means that's great, that's really accessible for lots of people, but actually so many people don't have a safe home or a safe space, or even just a working space where they're able to sit with their laptop and they don't have access to technology. So actually, in some ways, when people are running businesses, we can get really excited about all these new ideas and all these different ways that we want to become better, but it's really important to think about who you might not be encouraging to get involved because of that. And I think that's kind of the point around home just being one example, but of where you may think that you're making a decision for your business that is supporting equality or equity, but actually if you research into it and look into it, you're preventing a whole range of other people from applying for jobs, for coming into your workspace because of that. So I think it's just, we're at this point now where businesses are making change and are trying new things, which is amazing, but it's all about kind of not thinking too much about these kind of innovative things that are really showy, and actually stripping it back and thinking, who are we bringing into the business? How can we make sure that we're bringing in people from all different kinds of backgrounds and all different areas, and what are the barriers?
Yeah. And it's so interesting you say that, because I remember there was an MP from the North who said that people weren't really suffering because they could afford to have mobile phones. And someone had to educate her and say, for some of those people, it doubles up as it's a safety net to have a mobile phone, but also it's like a computer, it's everything in one. So it was quite a very stupid comment to make. And it's interesting because even as a business owner, some projects, if I want to reach the right people, so I'm working with refugee women and asylum seekers, I've had to invest in different equipment, new equipment, to make sure that they're not having to buy anything extra, so they come as they are and I do the rest, or my team do the rest. So a lot of it is about how do we, like you said, removing the barriers and making sure that what we're doing for a lot of these underserved communities, we're doing our best to make sure that we take away a lot of the barriers for them that allows them to function and to participate fully. Even things as simple as like breakfast. Some of them are coming hungry. You know, some companies don't realise that. If you're asking people to come for a focus group or, you know, to come to your training and it's, you know, it's, for example, women who are unemployed, they probably just fed their kids but didn't feed themselves, and they're coming in tired, and all we're giving them is maybe like a cup of tea and a biscuit, but actually what they need is a sandwich or, you know, like something decent. So that's the thing. So we didn't know that until we started doing the focus groups and asking them to be honest about their experiences. Sorry, Ruth, you talk about participatory democracy. I just love that in itself. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose it goes back to what I've been talking about, which is, you know, how do you enable people to take part in decisions? You know, the model we have now is, you know, we don't really get much of a say. You know, we all can vote once every few years. We might be able to join, you know, we get consulted on, and I don't know if anybody's looked at consultation documents, but who's got the time to read what usually are 100 pages long with really dense language? And you're like, oh no. And you know, even I, who, you know, I'm a bit of a nerd on these things. That's not, you know, and that's not.
You know, I was going to apologies to anyone who writes those documents.
I
just want to get.
No, don't apologise, because if you're writing them and they're 100 pages long, sort yourselves out. Nobody reads anything 100 pages long. I'm looking at you, the levelling up paper, 350 pages long. You know, I'm a fan of an easy read, if I'm honest.
Or Audible.
Yeah, but I think my point is that we've created a barrier then, because you've got to have time to do that. You've got to have good literacy. You've got to know where to find these things. And so, and also people quite often don't think, well, what have I got to say? What useful thing can I add? And so participatory democracy is kind of sort of going, actually, we want to bring you in. We're not going out to you to maybe ask your opinion, but then not do anything with it, or even tell you what we've done. We want to bring you in. We want you to be part of the decision-making process. So there's been really good examples in South America. So Brazil did a lot on participatory democracy. Chile has done a lot on things like participatory budgeting. So like actually opening up how local government spends its money and saying to the community, right, this is how much money we've got, these are the things we've got to pay for, how do we spend it? And you decide. So there's a lot, you know, the big well-known ones are things like citizens' assemblies and citizens' juries, but it's an opportunity that we can start to think differently. And it's about sharing power and removing barriers. So, because I think, you know, where people live, if you ask them what they want for their communities, they know really well. They know what they want. They know what will work for them and what will help make their communities better and what will help their life be better. But we rarely ask that question in a way that they feel they can answer. So for me, that's a big part of participatory democracy. And that's about decisions at all levels in society. National, regional, local.
I know, as you were talking, so when people talk, I always see, you know, either numbers or conversations that I've had. And I remember, I think it was during the Queen's funeral, or that week that she passed, and I was with my mum, and we I don't know what happened, we were looking at the royal family's castles and, you know, homes, and my mum made a really good point, because she loves anything to do like agriculture and land, and she said to me, look, they're so surrounded by greenery, you know, fresh air, you know, beauty, like we need green. I said, and then when you look out where a lot of, you know, I would say underrepresented communities live, it's just concrete. We're so far away from any kind of greenery or, you know, that kind of green space. And it just it really just makes you think how much of pollution that our minds take that actually can distort how people even feel or their moods. And, you know, and even though we say to people, oh, just go out for a walk, but if you're going out for a walk and you're faced with concrete, then it's not doing you any good because you're in this kind of concrete jungle. But it really made me think about how we have to really support people and helping them get out to nature, you know. And even if I don't even know, I'm just thinking out. Is it rifting? Is that what you call it? I'm thinking out loud. But when we talk about safe spaces and social issues, it's a lot of these people, we're going to them, but actually, how can we help them get to those green spaces mentally as well as physically? You know, I mean, this is just me talking.
No, I think that's a really good point. I'm actually speaking at an event, and I mean, I don't know why I get asked to speak at these things. Nature North, but I think for me, you know, a big thing is, you know, for people who don't have access to finance, you know, they don't have money, you can't get there if you don't have a car. And I think, you know, that to me is a really simple thing. We talk about, you know, oh, well, you know, we've got X number of National Trust properties or X number of national parks. There isn't public transport to get to those places. And that, you know, we can do all the positive advertising we want in the world, but unless somebody can get there, it's never going to change. And these places might only be 5 miles away from where they live, but if there isn't a means for them to get there. So I think there's that kind of, you know, when we think about equity, it's about how is the system equal. So, you know, nature exists and it surrounds us, but if there are structural barriers to you getting there, you're never going to benefit from it.
Because I think the conversation, we were talking about this, the conversation about social mobility sometimes get lost when we talk about EDI. And I think it's really important to touch on that because we talk about gender, we talk about race, disability, but actually social mobility really does get lost sometimes. Yeah, Lauren?
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything to say. I was just nodding.
Charlie, do you want to touch on anything? Go on, Charlie.
Looks said quite challenging for me to talk too much about social mobility living in London and coming from London, but you know, I think we do a lot of work with the NHS, for example, on things like gynecological wait times, a lot of initiatives around women's health, etc. And you do tend to find that in socially deprived areas, obviously, access to those services tends to be limited, non-existent, or there's no knowledge that they exist. And as I said, it's something that you have to level up infrastructure in essentially every single area of the country if you're going to truly reach equity across whichever section of equity we're talking about. And as I said, I think social mobility is definitely an area or a part of the conversation that does get missed, but there is obviously quite a lot of businesses, a lot of government policy going into that area at the moment. But again, like I have this strong belief that policy doesn't really do a huge amount. It's really about the actions of the individuals that sort of drive change. At the end of the day, government does one thing, but the people tend to put them there, even if it is on an infrequent basis.
Yeah. Do you have any questions? Yeah. Oh.
Hello. So my question has two parts. I'm hoping it'll be simple though. How do you define community, and what do you think that we can do to strengthen communities in order to challenge and improve the structural inequalities that we have?
Thanks. Okay, I'll try and give you the short version, because obviously I could go into a whole theory of community. So you've got community of identity, obviously. And I think when we talk about community in the concept of place, and I think that's why a lot of people talk about place rather than community, I think, again, it goes back to how do those people define it who live there? You know, so I live in an area called Gorse Hill, which is in Stretford, and we have a ward of Gorse Hill, but nobody who lives in Gorse Hill defines the ward as Gorse Hill, so it has this slightly arbitrary boundary that we all have created. And I think that, for me, again, it goes back to that thing of, you know, what do the people who live there define as that place, and then how do they define that community? And I think we have to be really careful of not kind of romanticising community, because actually you can have real discord in communities. So I think some of those structural... So, sorry, just say your second part of the question.
How do you define community, and what can we do to improve community in order to strengthen the problems we're facing as structural inequality?
So I think for me a big thing is how do we bring people together? How do we enable that community to come together and know each other and understand each other and have a say on what they feel they need? Because actually that's one of the ways that you kind of overcome those differences. In my previous role, I did this community assembly in this quite small place in Birmingham called Nechells, and it was about 20 different people from that community, and all really different, all had really different needs, different political perspectives, all that sort of stuff. But when you actually got them all talking, it was really interesting the things that they saw as, that they all agreed on as positive things, not all the things that they felt needed to change to make their community better. And I think that for me is a big thing, is I think the levelling up agenda is a big problem, because people are deciding what the solution is for that place rather than going to that place and actually engaging with the people and being patient with them to understand what the needs of that place are and what they think the solutions are. So I think for me, again, it goes back to that participation. If we don't get into places and enable people to talk to each other and come up with their solutions, whether we agree with them or not, they know what that place needs. So they should be enabled to work to that point to make it better for them.
And also I think a lot of work when you are trying to work with certain communities, or whether it's different areas or different protected characteristics, there's a lot of skepticism if you're not already involved in that community. So a lot of organisations and communities that I've spoken to feel as if they're being used. So if they don't know who you are, and you've come in and it's like, listen, we want to help you with this case of, and then what happens next? And you get that quite a bit. So what we find, that we've allowed people to just literally just vomit all what's bothering them, what they don't like, and sometimes it can take hours. But even like that first session, just letting them get it all out, and then we have to say, all right, then give them, what do you think the solution should be? And sometimes a lot of people don't know what the solution is, because they've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy just being angry, and they've never known what the solution could be, because that's the way they've lived their life. So it's coming in and supporting them on that. It's like being a coach, actually, supporting them on that journey of discovery to actually find out what their main crux is, what is it that they'd like to see. It's not an easy task. It really isn't, is it? There was another question up there. Oh, yeah?
Just really quickly. And I also think that if you're going into those communities, like, the key thing is building those relationships. Yes. And then once you've got the relationships, it's going back into the communities and being like, this is what we're doing about it. Because so many times you build up the relationships, you might have one person in an organisation who you're like, yeah, I really, really like you, like coming from a non-profit perspective, and then they leave, and then suddenly then you don't know, and then all that work that you've done, all that community engagement is gone, and then the trust is gone, and then it takes double the time next time to build it back up. So I think it's just keeping everybody really informed, keeping going back and keeping the relationships going throughout your business is changing.
Yeah, so true. There's a question up there. Oh, no, you had your... Don't say that. Everything's relevant in this room.
Yeah, come on. Well, go for it. It's probably because it wasn't so much a question. It was just more a comment on talking about greenery and equality of access to green space. It's just interesting that you talk about like cities. Really, like it's interesting that cities aren't green, and the reason that they're not green is because we dedicate too much space away from greenery to other things, predominantly like car culture. And I just think it's really interesting that the majority of poor people don't have access to car. Most households don't drive. Like poor households don't drive. Yet they're living in a society where they have the majority of their public space dedicated to car infrastructure. So I just think it's really interesting to reframe the narrative around giving equality to people via green space in the city rather than maybe outside of the city, because being local is a really important part of equality and access to that. Yeah. It was just more of a point. I don't know. That's why I didn't want to say because it wasn't much of a question. Sorry, take it.
I was just going to say, yeah, no, it's a really good point. And there's some work in Manchester specifically being done. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Placemaking Piccadilly project that's happening. Yeah, it's a few nods. So they're basically trying to reimagine Piccadilly Gardens because it's not a garden at all. It's horrific. And they've been doing loads of work with community groups. They work with food banks. They worked with the homeless community. And it's all about kind of trying to get Piccadilly Gardens to reflect the community that it serves. And that's just like a good example, and I don't really know where it's going to go, but it's been a really good example of like community working with the public and seeing what people actually want. And then the next phase is going to be kind of lobbying. So sometimes there might be a barrier and it might not go anywhere, but I know that the biggest thing that's come from it is wanting green space, wanting it to feel like a really safe space with the bus stop there. As a woman at night, I don't like walking through Piccadilly Gardens, but I should be able to because there's public transport there. So there are things going on, but I think collectively we just have to work together when those projects are happening, even if it's not in our spheres, and get behind it, and then we can kind of all push through together.
I'm going to share a secret with you. So when I was younger, I thought, does anyone else believe in mermaids? I believe in mermaids. I do. So this is where, bear with me, I'm taking you on a journey. And so when I watched Splash, I used to sit in the bath with a bit of water and then wait to see if my legs would turn into a mermaid tail. But as I've gotten older, I do believe in mermaids, and it's interesting because that kind of creativity that comes with nature and water and all these things, it's quite sad because a lot of children don't get that, that energy and that space to feel creative, and with creativity comes ideas and the type of planet you want to live on, and the reason why I'm talking about this, I'm riffing again, is when we were kids, you would go to the field and, we would try and make out what the clouds were and all these silly things, but they were fun to do, and lie on the grass, and and this is why green space is important. Just being able to have that free space, free thinking, that a lot of our children will probably never get because of the lack of access, So it'll be interesting to see this kind of reimagining of city spaces to allow children access to just grass. Who'd have thought? We just want our kids to have grass and see trees and not on TV like me seeing I do believe in mermaids, and one day I will see one in real life somewhere. There's another question up there, wasn't there? Yeah.
Thank you. My name's Sophie. Thank you for your insights. It's been really interesting. Two things. I just wanted to highlight the efforts that this conference has gone to in terms of EDI and social representation. I think this is possibly one of the best and most represented. Yeah, so well done to everyone involved. As a new business owner, the world in terms of EDI seems massive, and obviously I'd love to be able to have an impact on all of the areas, but I'm interested in your thoughts about how you prioritise and if that's even the right thing to do.
Hey, do you want to just clarify your question in terms of what you mean by prioritise?
So there's a lot of issues that you've all spoken about. I'd like to be able to have an impact across all of them, but there are some that I identify with more and that I feel more empowered to be able to have an impact on. Is that the right kind of feeling to have or not?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak, I suppose, from personal experience on this one. As for my business, for our business, we have lots of challenges we're trying to overcome and solve for. And we probably can't solve every single one of them on our own, although we'll try, even if it kills me, but we will try. But you have to prioritize on which ones you think, first of all, will be most impactful, and which ones you believe that you are best placed to solve. And if you put those two together, you usually end up creating something that does have pretty enormous impact. You hear a lot in business world about, trying to solve, a huge gigantic problem that is going to generate a lot of revenue, etc. But actually a lot of the successful businesses or business ideas come in the sort of more niche, maybe where the opportunity isn't as well understood, but someone who's incredibly passionate about solving that particular problem tends to come out on top of those that try and take on essentially solving the world in one.
And also, I've said this throughout this summit, don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think change will happen when the passion and the genuine want is there. My organisation is about women, and there's times when people have said, won't you include men? And it's like, well, no, because my passion is about supporting women's voices and amplifying those voices. And I just don't want, I'm not going to feel guilty about doing that. I think sometimes if that's not your area, you can get lost. And then your business gets confused, and so it's about knowing what journey you're going on, as Charlie said, and prioritising. And sometimes when you start putting action plans together and working with different people, those protected characteristics come in anyway. And then you learn how to deal with it. You literally learn how to deal with it, whether it's disability, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's social migration, whether even things like, I'll give you an example, even, stuff like single parent households. A lot of organisations don't even understand that part, because we're so used to, this is the way someone works and this is how we work. So, looking at protected characteristics, it's a minefield once you start unraveling it. So don't get yourself in a tiz about it. Literally start with what you know, and then the rest just happens, and don't feel guilty either. I think I'm past all this guilty stuff. If you're doing your best, I think the best can be good enough, and then you take it up to the next level. We have got time for another question. Is that okay? So we've got actions. So Lauren, what action would you like our business family to take away today?
I guess people... you had to come to me first because I sat in this seat. I think a really good action would be around recruitment. So when you're recruiting new people, really think about your recruitment practices, how you can... It's kind of what you're offering people. I think you were saying it in the last session. It's like, what are people getting from you as a business? That's not just money. And so then thinking about your recruitment practices and how you can engage people from all different areas, all different walks of life. And I think that way, if you're tackling it at that point, then you'll end up with a business that's full of people who are from a variety of backgrounds, have diversity of thought, and then you can kind of collectively tackle other challenges.
Yeah, nobody told me I had to do this beforehand. I would have thought of something actually meaningful. So apologies, everybody. I don't run a business, but I am a new director of a community interest company, and you don't have a huge amount of money, and you want to do the best and to be as fair and equitable as possible. So I think for me, create a collaborative culture with your, let people who work with you and for you participate in the decisions of the organisation. I think that's a massive one, and encourage everybody to join a union.
Charlie.
Yeah, for me, probably the most important thing when you're starting out a business is to set the core fundamentals at the beginning. So, if we're talking about equality in this example, or equity, you ingrain that in the business from day one into every decision you make, because as your business grows, whether it's your first business, second business, whatever, it can become very diluted as you chase, profits or revenue or growth or investment, etc. But if you ingrain those sort of core fundamentals at the very beginning of the business, they very rarely get lost. And then, when you end up recruiting people, as I said, if you do it successfully, that ends up being part of the process. When you're launching product, the same thing, services, exactly the same thing. And always look back and make sure that you haven't lost those fundamentals, because that's very easy to do, again, as you chase the success of the business.
And be kind to yourself. You know, it's not easy. Be kind to yourself and be a mermaid. So thank you. Can we have a big round of applause for Lauren, Ruth and Charlie? Thank you so much.